Okay, welcome back. And jump right into item 8.2 on the agenda, which is a report from HYA on the leadership profile report. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Dr. Lambert.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Max McGee, president of Hazard Young, Atea and Associates. Mr. McGee is joined by his associates, Nola Wellman and Dallas Strom, and they will now present the leadership profile report that HYA put together as part of the search for our next superintendent. Welcome, Max.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Lambert. It's great to be with you virtually, and I personally look forward to being with you in person about this time next week. So tonight we will be presenting a high-level overview of our leadership profile report. It's a 27-page report that we have delivered to the board. We'll go into that, I'm sure, in more detail next week. But today is really an executive summary for the board and for the community as we wrap up this really critically important phase of the superintendent search, the engage phase. And we have already started the recruiting phase, but more on that in a little bit. So I'm going to share our screen, and we're going to take turns here as we talk about the process for a little bit and our findings. So Nola, I think I'm going to start with you. If you could just share really what we were able to accomplish the last few weeks. It's all yours.
I can, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share with you the voice that your community shared with us qualitatively and speaking in not face to face, but certainly virtually, with approximately 200 of the community members. We had 3 open forums, but those actually ended up turning into more focus groups because the numbers were manageable so that we could have a dialogue. We had 21 additional focus groups and 17 individual interviews. I think it was very informative to us how engaged the stakeholders were. The members of all these groups took their time late in the evenings, dinner times when they had many other duties to be in, to give us their thoughtful responses to the questions that we had. The depth, the breadth, very interactive, and we appreciate each and every person who took their time to give us some input in this manner. In addition, quantitatively with the survey, we had 2,345 respondents. That is higher than we would normally expect from a group, from a school district of your size. And so we're thrilled with the response. We had 52 Spanish language participants, and you can see there, without me reading all of the numbers, the high engagement of parents, of teachers and certificated staff members, and the support staff members, in addition to students. We wish we had had a larger number of students participate, but I was fortunate to be in the focus group with students, and they had tremendous input for us. With those respondents, we had 2,689 comments on the open-ended question. So lots of engagement and opinion about the next superintendent in this process. What we came away with, and all of that input, both the qualitative and the quantitative, were really 5 takeaways. And you've talked about several of these this evening. So I think you have a clear mind about the direction that the new superintendent must take. One, first and foremost, is effectively address the issues related to equity and diversity in all of the ways, in hiring and retaining, in discipline, in achievement. Many of the areas there are issues related to equity and diversity, and in the community as well. And so that would be a high level of interaction regarding that. The second one was just to instill trust and mutual respect among the stakeholders. And maybe that has fallen apart a little more during the COVID time, that there's a sense of mistrust and wondering what's happening. But to build that trust again, and as I heard, I think it was one of your elected officials say, I don't think it's gone too far, but to spend some time, the new superintendent needs to build that trust and spend time with the community and the internal stakeholders as well, students and staff. The number 3 was to communicate frequently, clearly, thoughtfully, transparently, and really listen actively and deeply. Again, when that all of the issues have happened in the last year, communication has been inconsistent, confusing at times. There's been frequent communication, but you may be turning left when you need to turn right, and it seems that there was some question that the new superintendent should spend time on communication. The 4th one was about bringing the stakeholders together with that strategic plan to make sure that you articulate it and you implement it, but that you know where you're going and that there's constant drive toward achieving that strategic plan, focused on the achievement. The health was brought up and the growth of every student every day. Again, as one member shared, we really want to make sure that we're making progress, that it's not just a vision and a goal that we pull together and yes, we ought to do that, and then it goes on a shelf. But instead, we're making significant progress toward that vision and goals. And then lastly, to authentically engage students, staff, parents, service providers, all of the community partners. I think you mentioned even this evening, the community members really want to engage with the school community and be helpful. And sometimes they feel like they don't know how to do that. And that is an important takeaway for us. So those were 5 things that we heard. When we asked all the focus groups, what are the strengths of the school districts, we heard loud and resoundingly the reputation for educational excellence, that your school district is forward thinking, that you want and you have a reputation for being excellent. The extensive community support, the number of elections that you've passed and how much support you've had, that you have a highly educated and engaged parent community. All of these things were listed and seen as strengths of the community, as well as the outstanding staff at all levels of the system. Teachers, the support staff, all listed as outstanding. It was also noted that students have many opportunities of choice and within their school and outside to make choices for their own personal growth. And then just the strength that we will certainly use in our recruiting is that it's a thriving university school. It's a lovely place to live. It has an excellent school district should they bring their family, and it really makes the school district a destination district for many families. So those were consistently the strengths that were brought up. And Max, I think you're going to jump into the strengths of the survey.
I am. Thank you. So I was pleased to be able to work both with focus groups and then extensively with the survey. And the strengths of the survey, as you'll see graphically in a minute, but really just to lay out the top 5 to summarize them, are all here: the quality of education in the district, the career and college and frankly life readiness of graduates, high standards for the students, and as Nola said earlier, what we heard from the focus groups, effective staff at all levels. And one of the metrics that we use is we ask respondents to the survey to indicate if they would recommend families moving into the district based on the quality of schools. Generally, that runs about 80%. And so when we saw results of 90% and upwards with some of the subgroups, that was very impressive. As far as breaking it down quantitatively, every one of our questions had 5 different answers. Those in first 9, the scale was excellent, good, average, poor, and no opinion. Those are the ones that are italicized and bold-faced. The other questions were strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, no opinion. For the analysis, we drop out no opinion. And then what we do is we look at the percentage of positive responses. So that is, in the first questions, either excellent or good. That means average is a negative response. For the other questions, strongly agree or agree is considered a positive response. And so we break this down and color code it. And so we use a 5 to 1 as an indicator of a strong positive response. And actually that's rounded up. It's 82% to 18, I think is 4.55 and change. So we count that as a 5 to 1 positive to negative ratio. So any area where you see this much green, the district is truly excelling. And districts, of course, when you have this chart, you may say, well, really 4 to 1 is more realistic for our district, or we'd like to have 6 to 1 positive to negative ratio. But HYA, we generally use 5 to 1 for our surveys. And frankly, we're used to seeing more red. So just the fact that most of this chart is green and white is really a positive result. And you see it just looking at this, I say I did miss one red cell, but I'll point that out in a moment. But the greens you can see both as we look horizontally, the quality of education across the board, pretty much the staff, certainly teacher support, staff administration, recognize high standards for student performance. And across the bottom, the effective teachers and staff members and recommending moving to the district because of the schools. But we were also really impressed looking vertically with the Spanish speakers. Now we only had 52 respondents to the Spanish speaking survey, but it was a high degree of positive responses. And I talked to John McKay about this. I actually talked to John a couple times. I had a one-on-one interview, separate phone calls, and then I had a meeting with a language culture equity team, another meeting with family liaisons, and both those were really well attended. I think we had about 20 participants in each of those groups. And to see the work that your LCE team and your family liaisons do with the Spanish-speaking families is truly effective and frankly inspirational. And as John and I were looking at this data, I personally want to credit that kind of outreach with that high positive response from the Spanish-speaking community who responded. And I also found that level generally of confidence when in the Spanish-speaking community forum. It was, I think we only had 11 or 12 people, but by and large, it was very positive. And there were some issues about food, about transportation, but by and large, the Spanish-speaking community rated the district very highly. And so that's it for the strengths for now, and we'll come to the challenges that the new superintendent will need to address. So I'm going to turn this over to Dallas. So go ahead, Dallas.
Okay, thank you. I want the board to know, like Nola and Max, it's been a pleasure and is a pleasure working with your school district. I've known about Cooter for many, many years. I've been in Colorado over 35 years. And it's a phenomenal school district, great reputation as indicated in the previous information. These are challenges and issues presented by the focus groups, and they're the ones that seem to bubble up to the top most often. So one is students' social emotional needs are and will become even more significant in the next year or two. And that in large part is an assessment of what COVID has done to the district for families and for kids and social emotional needs. And I noted tonight, I believe that you're even looking at maybe some more mental health support and counseling support for next year, which is I think a tremendous thing to have that going already. Assessing the needs of under-resourced, traditionally underrepresented and marginalized students and families. That came up a number of times, and I know you've got some work going on that now. And the people with whom we talked really want that work to continue and to go in more depth. Impact on COVID on education, finance, and trust. We've already kind of discussed that. And I think the trust issue was largely around possibly the communications issue on when are we going to be in school, when we aren't going to be in school. And that was something that, that I know you as a board have heard about. Retaining and attracting exceptional staff, that's something that's really important. Heard over and over again what a great staff you have, and there's a worry that if something happens to reduce finances in the district too much, you might be losing staff, and that would be a travesty because you've got some phenomenal tenured teachers in the district. And attracting exceptional staff, you've got a beautiful area, wonderful place, and so there's some concern that it's maybe a little pricey to live in Fort Collins. That was mentioned several times, but retaining and attracting exceptional staff, and that's not only classified staff and certificated staff, that's everybody in the district. It's very important to maintain that magnet of support. And then site-based management, that came up several times, and it was talked about in the finance study you were just doing a little while ago. Are there some non-negotiables that every school has or should have? And if some school doesn't want a counselor, is that okay? There is a question about that. If someone wants to take funds and not support mental health, is there a support for that from the central office? Should that be held as an important part of every school? Okay, the survey, the top challenges, and again, Max is the master survey person, but the district survey talks about the top challenges and issues: attending to students and staff social emotional needs, especially given issues associated with remote hybrid learning and the pandemic; meeting the needs of historically unrepresented minority students and special education students, and that also came out in the previous information from interviews with focus groups; understanding and addressing the different perceptions between parents and staff; improving the quality of communication was a big one; and engaging with stakeholders in schools and throughout the community. Those were very important. And now Max has some differences to note from the survey data he put together.
Yeah, thanks, Dallas. And these challenges are important because really the new superintendent will need, I know you're addressing some now, but the new superintendent will need to continue this and sustain the focus on some of these challenges. So we look at the red areas as problematic because that's where actually the negative responses outnumber the positive responses. And I didn't miss a cell with the teachers. I'll point that out in a moment. So just looking again, going across, looking at the rows across, the effectiveness in meeting the needs of historically underrepresented minority students, the negative responses pretty much outweigh the positive responses across the board, again, except for the Spanish-speaking families. And we heard this in focus groups. I know it's not news to you. We heard an opening community forum, a speaker talk about the need for more diverse faculty and staff. So that area does need attention. I think the quality of communication, while we have heard it, has really improved, and Todd is to be certainly commended for that, for his efforts to be out and about for the communication. And we know that COVID has created some challenges, but this looks to be an area for teachers and support staff and students as well. And just overall, it didn't receive terribly high marks. Let me just point out that this is not uncommon. In almost every one of our surveys, it's the positive that we give districts, no matter what size, ranging from 50,000 to 5,000 or less. The quality of communication from the district always hovers pretty close to a balance between positive and negative. But as we heard constantly, we want more communication, more transparency. Communicate. You can't communicate enough. So the new superintendent will have to be an exceptional communicator, and then some. Some of the things that we don't usually see, though, are the differences between parents and teachers in some of these key metrics, where the teaching staff generally feels much more positively about how they're meeting the needs of individual children, and then children with disabilities, English language learners, gifted and talented. So we really can't speculate as to why this difference exists, but we think it's important for the next superintendent to be able to address it and dive more deeply into data or gather additional data. And this is the kind of thing maybe you can learn more of through more visits and interviews and focus groups to understand this. Because usually parents and teachers are generally more closely aligned. And then looking over at the far right, looking at these last two columns, that the English speakers, the people who responded to the English language survey who identified as Hispanic, Latino, Latina, generally rated the district, these issues lower than the Spanish-speaking families. And again, I think this is an issue that we don't know the cost for this. We speculated a little bit ago, and as I spoke with John about the impact of family liaisons, the positive impact with Spanish-speaking families. But maybe this indicates there's more of a need to reach out to those others. Again, we'll leave that for the new superintendent to dive into. But I think these two areas are important were important to point out and provide some, I think, valuable data and a direction for improvement and growth with the next leadership, with the next superintendent and her or his leadership team. And so I'm going to turn this back over to Dallas.
Thanks.
I'll talk about the characteristics. Yeah, thanks, Dallas.
The next slide talks about the characteristics of the next superintendent. These came from the focus group interviews, and these desired characteristics bubbled up over and over and over again in our discussions, and these are the ones that seem to come out most frequently. A thoughtful and active listener, and exceptional communicator. Again, the communication piece is very important, as you have heard as we have gone through this report. Someone who's going to be an active listener, someone that's going to come in and really assess and listen well before decisions are made. Inspirational leader, energetic leader, someone says a firecracker. Let's get that superintendent to really have a lot of energy. A proven ability to engage in community partnerships, including nonprofit service organizations, businesses, and higher education. There's a desire to have someone that has that experience who comes into the district. Demonstrates a sincerely kind heart, compassion, and kindness and caring for all district staff, kids in the community. And of course, that's a trait I think that speaks the importance of caring for kids and really building a culture of the district presenting that. Someone who demonstrates integrity, honesty, and transparency. Someone who, if they make a mistake, they can look at the staff of the community and say, hey, I made a mistake, and we're going to change that, or I'm going to do a better job next time we present that particular issue. Someone who's innovative, creative, and out of the box thinker, someone that comes in with a lot of energy. And that, of course, would go with the inspirational and trait that people want in a superintendent. Visible, approachable, and accountable through involvement and being an active presence in the schools. They want someone who is seen and not just barricaded in their office. They want them out in the community. They want them in the schools. They want the kids to know who the superintendent is. That's very important. They also stress strong educational leadership background is important. Someone who's a classroom teacher. They like someone who understands what it's like to be a teacher in the classrooms, which is really important, and a very strong academic leader. A unifier who builds strong culture of respect and trust with a positive voice and presence. And I think a lot of that goes along with honesty, transparency, and visibility. Someone who can really develop a strong bond with those with whom he's working or she's working, and demonstrates experience with diverse marginalized populations and successfully addresses problems and gaps related to equity and inclusivity issues. So, and again, you've heard that in a number of different areas in the survey. And I think that these are 10 really important characteristics that the new superintendent hopefully will bring into your school district.
And for the expectations for the next superintendent from the survey, you're going to hear these constant themes through it all in our needs assessment from the community, is someone who can foster, sustain, strengthen that positive professional climate of mutual trust and respect. This was overall the consensus #1 from all of the staff groups. Very important to look at the culture and climate of trust. And then someone who can provide regular, transparent communication. Again, teachers, students, our Hispanic respondents rated this as #1 or #2. Very important, the communication trait or quality. And #3 is just to sustain and strengthen a culture of belonging and connection for students and staff. Again, I think we mentioned earlier, the students want to know who the superintendent is. Parents want their students and want to know who that person is. Respondents to the Spanish-speaking survey and the Hispanic respondents to the English survey identified this as #1, and the importance of bringing in those cultures and communities into actively involved in the school district. #4 is addressing and understanding the needs of the diverse population. Students said this was #1, tied with communications, and teachers rated it as #2. So they see that diversity in their classrooms and see the needs presented there. And #5, and I think this has been a concern, is while a strength is that we have excellent staff now, we want to make sure we can continue to recruit, employ, and retain that effective personnel. Parents rate this as #1. With some of the cost of living and that sort of thing, the fear is that that will become more and more difficult. So the next superintendent really needs to be able to do that in a very impressive way. That's the results of our focus group and our survey, and the themes were very dominant throughout. We want to share with you what our next steps are, and that is that we have already started and have been speaking with potential applicants and encouraging applicants that we know of to look at the position and apply for it. We will process those applications, begin conducting our screening interviews within the next 2 weeks and reference checking. We intend to present our slate of candidates to you around March 22nd, whenever it's convenient for you, but in that time frame. We will help with scheduling those interviews of those candidates, and at some future meeting we want to discuss with you the contract and compensation and really talk about the process for handling the next round after the first round of interviews that you will do shortly after March 22nd. So those are our next steps, and perhaps some of those conversations will happen next week. I'm not sure, in the study session.
Great. Thank you, Nola. Thank you, Dallas. So just to close out with a big picture summary, we read every single one of the 2,400 comments, and I'm sure some, if not all, of the board members will do that as well. But this comment particularly resonated with us. The person, that means a new leader, should listen to parents and all stakeholders, we added that piece, and take their opinions and concerns into consideration when instituting policy changes that affect our students. Surveys should matter and not be summarily dismissed. Well, I just want to assure the writer of parent comment 722, the board and the staff, the students, and the greater community that we are taking your information seriously. We know you need an experienced, energetic leader. Leadership matters. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this leadership profile report to recruit candidates in state and from across the country. This report will be shared with our 90 plus consultants across the country. It will be shared with the individuals who have already contacted us. We've had about 15 individuals contact us. They are interested in this job. We will share this with them after, of course, we have presented it to the board this evening. We will use the leadership profile report as the basis for interview questions for our screening interviews. We just don't ask the typical, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses questions. We want to ask questions that are based in the data and the quantitative and qualitative data that you as a community gave to us. I know the board will use this information as a basis for their interview questions as well. And finally, this leadership profile report will be used during the transition time. When the new superintendent is selected, we want to sit down with that new leader and the board of directors and really plot out a first 100-day plan and the annual goals. So again, this input has been invaluable to us in helping us recruit candidates and identify a slate, but I think it will be important through every step of the process. And just finally, anticipating perhaps a question, well, we've been asked, aren't all these reports kind of alike? Well, sure, there's some commonalities, but there's also some differences. And I just wanted to point out some of the things that really stood out in this report that don't stand out with other districts. One was the level of engagement from the business community and nonprofit partners. We don't see the kind of potential in most districts that we see here. And we don't hear the kind of pleas from the business community. These focus groups were really well attended, and the comments were very astute. And so the new superintendent is really going to need to make a concerted effort to connect with this larger community. We also heard the need to be not just have an open door policy, but to get out through that open door. And I know, Todd, you've done a great job on that thus far, and it's hard with a district with this many schools and this big. How can someone be everywhere at once? But that goes for the new leader, and the leadership team will need to be, I think, more of a presence in the school and understand some of the issues, both the benefits, but also some of the problems that we heard about related to site-based management. We don't often hear teachers say we need some more unification from the district. So that was the third area that stood out. We don't always hear we need a unifier. We generally hear we need more autonomy, more individual control. But I think I know we heard a plea for more balance between site-based management and then some centralization as well. And finally, we hear a lot about equity, but the stories, the individual stories, the narratives, many of which are contained in the comments, were very compelling to us as we look for someone who has really been able to not just talk about equity and work about policies or create conditions that should support equity, but somebody who's actually done the work and made a difference on many different metrics on addressing disproportionalities, addressing biases, both conscious and unconscious, and of course, moving the needle on the opportunity and achievement gaps significantly. So I just want everyone to know that your voice has been heard and will make a difference. And the very last word is a big thank you to Tessa, because she was instrumental in organizing the focus groups, the interviews, working with the schools to get the survey out the door and get such a great response. So members of the board of directors, thank you very much for indulging our presentation this evening. And we're open to questions now or and/or can go into more detail, of course, next week.
Great. Thank you to each of the three of you, Nola, Dallas, and Max, for showing up at our regular public meeting and presenting this evening. It's very important to us that we get the information you're gathering from the public and put it in the public sphere as we do this search process. And I also want to thank you for ending with a thank you to Tessa, because I think the board members and everybody sitting in the room agrees we can't get much done without her. So, and finally, thank you to the three of you for going that extra mile to finish up the focus groups. And that was a ton of work on your part, and I appreciate it. And there were some last minute additions that I greatly appreciate. So. With that, I'm going to open it up to board members. I know we'll be seeing you in particular, Max, and we really look forward to that smaller setting when we get to really discuss this with you, but I want to make sure board members have an opportunity for any questions they have at this point. So go ahead, Naomi.
Hi, yes, thank you. The presentation was amazing, and the profile was very in-depth. One of the things that I noticed was that you said for a district this size, you expected to have closer to 400 student responses, and it looks like we only had 76. So I'm a little bit concerned about that as well, and I wonder, obviously COVID times are weird, but if you think that we should try to elicit anything else as we're continuing in this process, or do you think that we have what we need in order to move forward?
Well, as Nola said, I think we heard a lot from the student focus groups, and she can add to this in a moment. And we do like to hear more, but I think COVID had a lot to do with it. Generally, with the high schools, the principals can have, the juniors and seniors, whatever, take it during an advisory period or something. But, with the hybrid learning and remote learning, that just doesn't happen. And but I think we have heard student voice. We can talk more about maybe how to engage them on the back end with the finalists. But I don't think at this point any additional survey data would probably change what we had, because the students took this seriously. And of the 2,400 comments, maybe 3 were inappropriate, and those were not from students. The quality of the student open-ended comments was really impressive, Naomi.
I would tell you, in terms of the focus group, they would have stayed and visited another hour or so. They were very engaged in sharing their opinions. I believe we had some of the leaders, maybe even that you mentioned, from the high schools, and they really had put thought and effort into what they see as critical attributes for the next superintendent. So I think we got great quality, even though the quantity of comments was less than we normally would expect. I think the themes are still reflected in the report.
Other board questions? Go ahead, Rob.
So you've alluded to COVID as it relates to, for example, the quantity of student feedback that we got. I guess I'm interested in your qualitative opinion about how COVID affected the results broadly, right? I mean, if you read the report, there are references to political biases or concern that the new superintendent doesn't have a political agenda and whatnot. I sort of wonder whether that has to do with people sort of reacting to decisions around COVID, or whether there's something more broad about that. And so that's a specific example from the written comments, but even as it relates to the quantitative table of the survey, for example, or maybe from the forums, what's your sense about how what people are looking for in a new superintendent and what they say they're looking for is influenced by the short-term effects of COVID versus sort of what we hope, I guess, would be a 10-year time horizon with a new superintendent at least.
Right. So from the survey aspect, I think the numerical questions were because we did put in there some phrases in there about, consider this, try to take COVID out of your responses to this considerations. And I think by and large, numerically, they seem to do that because there were so many positive responses. And, they were by and large consistent with the focus groups. And we did not hear nearly as much about COVID in focus groups as we did in the comments. So frankly, I think the open-ended questions, they're an opportunity for people to vent to a certain extent. And it was very clear. I mean, we heard in your open forum tonight, one of the public comments, a few of them about that. And so I think people just want to say, we want the kids back in school. We want them back now. And, there's nothing the new superintendent can do about that immediately, but there will be a follow-up to obviously, analyze what the impact has been. There were several comments about that. Really, let's take a look at this. Let's study it. Let's analyze it, and then let's do something about it. But it's not just about getting kids back into school and picking up where we left off. So I think there was just some chance to vent about COVID and the political issues. I don't know what the basis for that is, other than coming off the election and a divisive time. There was venting about political agendas on the right and the left, and frankly, that's where some of the more inappropriate comments, the few, and there were probably more than 3. I think that's an exaggeration, but I would say there were less than 30 overall, frankly, and they. So I think, again, Rob, that was more of a chance to vent. And it was more in the comments than in the numerical data. And I didn't hear any venting in the focus groups, and not all that much about COVID, other than, once we get back, we need to do this, that, and the other. How about Nolan and Dallas? Did you hear much in the focus groups?
I heard a number of teachers and the classified and certificated staff, they worried a little bit about getting the kids back in and getting them going again and getting them in a routine. And they also know that Magic Wand isn't going to take care of this. It's going to take a lot of assessment, a lot of survey, a lot of study, a lot of support. And that's when the mental health folks and social emotional support came up in our discussions. And also support for some of the teachers that might need some social emotional support is important. But none of them said, that I heard that they all had the answer. No one had the answer to solve COVID. Not one person with whom I talked knew how to solve it. They're all, and they also understand that none of us or none of you on the board have been through this either. And so they know you're doing the best you can, and they're trying to do the best they can, and they're just hoping and praying that things will start coming together after the after the shots have been taken, and more safety and things are provided for the teachers and the students. So it's, that's what I heard. I don't know about you, Nola.
Well, COVID was mentioned, but it was mentioned as an accelerator or as an emphasizer to the things that they already saw as needing to happen in the school district. The underserved, marginalized populations have really been affected even more because of COVID, but they still had needs prior to COVID, and they still rose to the top as a need for the school district to address their concerns. Communication, that was already and continues to be something, but it was accentuated by COVID. But I never heard anyone really angry over it. Just, well, we can take COVID out, but this was also impactful during that time. I think the issue of the relationships with the community partners was perhaps one that they wish they had stronger partnerships and could have helped more during COVID. They don't know how, but they felt as helpless as probably you have felt and as the staff has felt. That's their desire to help the school district is genuine and authentic, and they wanted to help more during the COVID period of time. The level of trust was brought up, mutual respect was brought up, and again, that particular one, some people believe was in check or working fine before COVID, and now they believe that it will move quickly back to a strong level of trust. But, you know, it's been such an unsettling time for individuals, for families, for teachers, staff, that they just don't know getting back to normal, whether that mutual respect and trust will follow along quickly, and many believe that it will. So those were really the issues. I believe that in the focus groups, they did try to put aside COVID specific comments and more just as the school district needs and where our next leader needs to take us in the next 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Go ahead, Kristen.
Just a quick question. Can we use the PowerPoint presentation that you did and put that on our PSD Superintendent Search page? And that'd be very informative to people who weren't able to make it to the meeting today to see how much input we did have for that.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd love to have, but we're going to put it on our website by the job posting as well.
Good question. Okay, great. Nate?
Maybe I missed it, but can you remind us of what the closing date for applications is?
We have the closing date posted for March 15th, but we have informed all the people who've reached out to us, as well as we already have 5 applications in, that we're going to start our screening interviews the last week of February. So we're gonna start screening qualified candidates as they come in. So. But applications close the 15th officially.
Thank you. DJ?
I just want to clarify for the public, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are going to be other opportunities for the public to give input besides these focus groups that we had. Is that correct? Is that what we're thinking?
I think that decision will be up to the board and how we handle the finalists. I mean, the finalist names need to be made public. We all know that. And I think, DJ, that's a conversation maybe we could have on the 16th, really start talking about what those finalist interviews would look like and how the public can engage with the finalists. We have, Dallas and I actually just completed a search a few weeks ago, and we're able to run forums for finalists. This is a smaller district, but we had 2 nights of community forums for the finalists with a Spanish-speaking interpreter, and it went well, Dallas.
Yeah, it went very well.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk more about that on the 16th, but I think that's probably a board decision at this point.
Great, thank you. Rob?
Yeah, so you alluded to this a little bit, but I'm curious about, setting aside COVID, as we just talked about, how do the results, as you saw them and heard them, compare with comparable districts, comparable socioeconomics, comparable size, that kind of thing? I know you alluded to that to some degree, that the gaps, for example, between the teachers and the parents on some of those questions seem to be wider. I didn't know whether there were other things that could help us understand how typical or atypical these results are, and therefore what we might need or not need with respect to our superintendent.
Sure. I think atypical were that gap between the parents and teachers. We usually don't have many people respond at all to a Spanish-speaking survey, so we were pleased to see that. I think that gap is worth noting. in other districts, I mean, really, we'll have like 12 people instead of 50 Spanish-speaking respondents, and their results are usually aligned with those on English language surveys that identify as Latino or Hispanic. But I think big differences were the need for community engagement from the nonprofits and the businesses. We usually don't get many people at all to these focus groups. In fact, I just had an email coming now that there will be no meeting with the business community tomorrow for another search some colleagues are working on. And the board secretary wanted me to make sure they got the message. And so I think that this was atypical to see this level of desire to support the district and frankly, a little bit of frustration and how to go about that. I think another piece was this idea of the balance. We usually don't hear so much about balance between site management and central and central controls and common policies and practices. We heard, I think, more of a desire. At least I did in my groups, and Nolan Dallas can speak to theirs. But I heard more of a desire than I ever thought I would hear about for less site management and more centralization. It almost always goes the other way, Rob. We got too much district this, district that. But there's a desire for, hey, we need some common policies, practices, messages. It's just and the rationale is that it has led to inequities, is I think a primary driver behind that. So those were really, I think, three areas. We do hear a lot about, it's kind of typical in larger districts, we want to see the superintendent more and the superintendent staff more. That was not atypical, but it is a loud voice. Dallas or Nola, anything Nola, you just finished a large district of similar size and demographics in Texas.
Yes.
Anything stand out?
I think the site-based was a surprise to me, and I think it was more around the overarching value in your school district of best practices. And when we know there's best practices, are we allowing certain schools not to implement those best practices because we have this value of site-based? And that those competing values were very confusing. Several of the groups, teachers, special needs, mental health, they would even in the areas of classified, when we know there's certain things that should happen in our schools because the research, the literature, the practice out there means this is the best practice, and we're allowing by our value of site-based for those best practices not to be implemented in the district. Is that okay? And I was surprised at that conversation. More people saying, no, if there's a best practice for the best way to handle X, then we all should be doing that. And so there was that desire more than I would have expected. And in any large district I've been in, usually it's about the district makes these rules and they don't understand us. So it's usually the opposite.
Great. Thank you. Maybe we should, are there any final comments? Okay, if not, really thank you all three of you for joining us this evening. And Max, we'll look forward to meeting you in person finally next week. So greatly appreciate your presenting to the public this evening. Thank you.
And we'll share the thank you all and look forward to seeing you. And I'll send tests of the final version to post on your website.
Perfect. Thank you very much.